My name is Joel, and I'm the program chair for the OnlineTestConf. It's actually a real honor to get started today and to have everyone here. We have literally hundreds of people joining the session today. And just to give you an idea, this project called the OnlineTestConf started as a very weird idea where basically I was watching my wife attended an online test conference for project managers, and I thought to myself, hey, how cool can that be that people can actually attend a conference from their own house, from their own office, and can actually see people who maybe sometimes we do not have the option of going and visiting because they're, again, conferences are far away and they're expensive, and we need to get people to agree to have us there. So we came up with the idea, and it was about a year and a half ago. And well, it's great. We're here. We continue doing this, and it's basically an honor to have all of you here. We have great speakers lined up. Let's actually get started with what we're going to be doing today. So first of all, today's agenda, we have some great speakers coming up other than myself that I'm going to be speaking afterwards. The idea of the OnlineTestConf is basically to have both experienced speakers as well as newcomers to the field, and so we try to have a mix of them. And so we will have Lalit, who's going to be talking about how to get non-testers to test and how can you help them help you. We have a pretty cool session from Jesper about shifting and all the trends of shifting, left shifting, right, all the shifts that you can do and how to do it. We have a pretty nice session by Karishma Kohli from the US on Mythbusters on test automation. Karishma has quite a lot of experience in test automation. We'll share it with us. And at the end, we will have, at the end of today, we will have the honor of having Mr. James Bach speaking. He has a pretty interesting keynote called When Animals Test that I'm pretty much looking forward into it. Little bit of information during the sessions. Again, you can log in and log out whenever you want using the same link. Take into account the sessions will be recorded and we will be sharing them, maybe not immediately, maybe tomorrow, stuff like that, but they will be shared, and that is our idea, to make sure that everyone can actually see those sessions and have access. We understand that some of you might be working right now, some of you might be leaving because, again, we're working in many time spans. And so, again, we will be sharing everything with you. Very important, because we want to make these conferences as interactive as, let's say, the brick and mortar ones, the ones where we actually fly to go to. We have the Slack channel, and it has proven during the previous sessions very successful in order to help people interact. So there's already a couple of Slack channels where people are introducing themselves. It's better to use the Slack channels than to use the chat that you have on Zoom. I would recommend that people use the chat in Zoom or the Q&A in Zoom mostly for asking questions. And if you want to say hi, if you want to say anything about the sessions, then for that, go ahead and use the Slack channels. Notice that every session will have their own Slack channel so that you can ask questions before, during, after the sessions on that Slack channel so that we can continue the conversation and the discussions over there. And again, if you want to introduce yourselves, we have a couple of Slack channels for that. If you're looking for jobs, you can do it in there. Go ahead and do it in there. Obviously, you can tweet about it. You can share on Facebook or any other LinkedIn or social media. It would be very cool if you can do it using the hashtag OnlineTestConf. That way we can actually see everything in there. And if you have any comments, questions, ideas, anything at all, my email is written at the bottom. You will see it a couple of times. It's joel@OnlineTestConf. I have a couple of emails, so that is only one of them. But please feel free to send us any emails. Obviously, today we're going to be pretty busy. But we are, as I said, this is the third session that we're doing. We do them more or less every six months. And we're always trying to improve based on your comments. Now, the way that we have structured the sessions is that we have 45-minute sessions and then 15 minutes breaks. Those breaks have a number of reasons. First of all, again, we need to give time for people in between sessions to grab coffee or a snack. But also so that you can also continue the conversation. We do want to make this an interactive session. It's incredible how people from the four corners of the world actually get to talk. And I already saw people all the way from California to, I think, Lvov in the Ukraine and all over Europe, Israel, obviously, as well. So go ahead and talk as much as you want. We also would really appreciate if you can send us your selfies. If you're attending the online TestConf with pals, go ahead and take that picture with those selfies posted on the Slack channels, me at OTC. I can't promise anything, but I can tell you that the last time we were so amazed by those selfies that we picked a number of them and then we sent some prizes by our sponsors to them. So if you want to get some stuff, send us a cool selfie and we might as well do something about it. New in this online TestConf and following up on the tradition from other events, it's not fair that only those who sent their sessions up front a couple months ago and had ideas and maybe had 45 minutes of stuff to talk about can actually talk. We want to hear you. So we're scheduling lightning talks for tomorrow at the end of the last session. The last session tomorrow is by Rob. But after that session, we want to have lightning talks. And the idea of lightning talks is a very short 5-minute speech about something that it's bugging you or an idea that you have or something that you want to share. If you have an idea, you can go to www.onlinetestconf.com/lightning talks. As you can see the URL in there, we'll be posting that on Slack as well. And send us your proposals. If we can have room for all of them, we will be scheduling about an hour, maybe 90 minutes for lightning talks. If we can put all of them, then that will be great. If we will need to choose, then we will choose a couple of them or a number of them. But do remember, we want to hear from you. It's your conference. It's not ours. We know our ideas, but we want to hear yours as well. So go ahead and let us know. The sessions will be tomorrow at 9 p.m. Central European Time or 3 p.m. Eastern. And they will be after our last keynote by Rob Lambert tomorrow evening, afternoon for you. Very important, we want to thank our sponsors. And again, sorry, we have some technical difficulties with sound. In any case, we do want to thank our sponsors. They are the ones who help us basically get the software and get a little bit of the money that we need in order to run this stuff. As you obviously know, this is a free event and we want to keep it free. It wouldn't be the same if it wasn't free. Everyone should be able to join. There should be no barrier absolutely to come here. So we want to take our gold sponsor Practice Test, actually a company I work with, so for giving us the gold sponsorship for these sessions, as well as our silver sponsors, Tea Time with Testers, Software Testing Tools, and Acceptance Software Technologies. Guys, if you can, please go to these guys, take a look into their sites. Remember, they are the reason that you are able to attend this session for free, okay? Last but not least, before we actually start the chats, I cannot say it enough. The real cool part about these sessions is happening around Slack. Both after the talks, people go into Slack and talk and review what they're doing, and all the presenters will be there. Some of them are already there. I saw Danny Fogg has already been very, very active for the last 2 days, actually talking with people about this conference. But we'll have everyone after the sessions joining there to continue the chats. You also have general channels. You have places where people can connect from LinkedIn, everything in there. We try to make Slack our corridors. So everyone who wants to meet everyone else, go ahead and join the Slack sessions. And again, it's the best option to make this a real live session and not only a succession of webinars that you can go and get good ideas. Obviously, the ideas are good. Obviously, everyone who has prepared the presentation has put all of him or her into it. But the real interesting stuff actually comes on the informal channels, I believe. And in this case, that will be the Slack channels in here. So that was more or less with the introductions. And we'll go ahead and we'll start with the first presentation. And as it happens, I will be providing this introduction. And the name of the chat is Testing in the Future Today, or what to do in order to prepare and strive for what is coming. So maybe some of you know me. I'm guessing that most of you don't. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, why should you listen to me? Well, you shouldn't, but if you're going to be here and listening, So I have been in testing for the last 20 years. As most of you, I guess, I'm also an accidental tester. I got into testing because it was the best job I could find during my college years. And what happens is that after being for 2-3 years in testing, I realized that I really, really like it. So I stayed. And for the last 20 years, I've been a tester. I've managed QA teams in a number of companies, both small teams as well as very, very large organizations. I started blogging a couple years ago. I tend to speak at conferences whenever people actually invite me to. And if you look at it, my work today is at a company called PractiTest, again, one of our sponsors. And if you can, go ahead and take a look into their site. If you do not have a QA management system or are looking for a very cool QA management, test management system, go ahead and take a look into it. Within PractiTest, I'm both a QA manager as well as chief solution architect. So if you have any complaints about PractiTest, I'm also the address for that. And I do run a couple of additional projects, one of them being this one, the OnlineTestConf, where I'm program chair, and I do have a very nice staff of volunteers who help me all the time. And another project that I hope to be able to talk about later on, it's going to be the state of testing report on the state of testing survey that hopefully will be going out later in the year. What do we want to talk about today? So obviously we want to talk about the future of testing, but I will want to start by going over the changes happening in the world and how they are affecting the R&D and IT organizations. Then I want to touch a point that is very important for me, because I believe many of us fail to see it this way, but how QA, it's more of a service than it is anything else. Then I will talk about a nice concept that I'm stealing from some pretty intelligent people, calling AASQ, and I will leave that for later. Those of you who know about it already know about it, and those of you who don't, hope that you will learn about that as well. And I will close the presentation with a couple of ideas on how can you prepare for the future of testing that will be coming here. Now, guys, I want to remind you, if you have any questions or anything that you want to go about, then the idea is that you have a Q&A client window within Zoom. So go ahead and use it, and I will try to answer those questions towards the end of the presentation. So let's get started. I would ask people, but I guess that everyone will agree with the answer. Do you think that the world has been changing lately? Do you see anything that makes you believe that the way that our parents used to live and the way that our grandparents used to live is different, and that makes you think that the way that our kids are going to grow up, that's a little bit scary, it's going to be completely different than what we have today? I guess that the answer is yes. And it's a trivial answer for that. But if we look into it, it's not something new. It's also not something that it's related either to testing or to research and development. It's something that has been happening around the world for literally hundreds of years. And if you look into it, the way that the economy of the world is wired, it actually pushes everything towards technological automation. Now, just to give you an idea what I mean by technological automation, if we think about it, this is the way that a factory plant used to look not very far ago, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 60 years ago. That same factory floor might look today like this. And what has happened is that the economy, the way that we are incentivized in order to work without thinking about testing even or development, software development at all, is that anything that can be automated in order to make it more economical will be automated. The human nature is basically lazy by nature, and that's okay, because the lazier we are, the more efficient we become. And so this is just one of those facts of life that is happening. Now, if we look into that, then we can see that some of the stuff that we have been very used to doing has been changing lately. So to give a couple of examples, and again, things that I have talked to people and read in articles and podcasts, if you think about it, it used to be about 10, 15 years ago, if you needed to generate a report for your accounting, you would send all the paperwork to someone, and it'll take them, this accountant, someone who actually studied accounting, it would take them about 3 days to generate a good report. Today, you can either do it by yourself using Excel and some spreadsheets and macros, or even accounting software in less than an hour. You don't need to be an accountant in order to do it. You have tons of accounting software that is helping you to do that. If you think about it as well, once we used to have travel agents, and actually not once. If I think about it, the way that my parents travel today, they call a travel agent. They make flight reservations, hotel reservations, maybe car reservations. If you look into the way that my wife actually plans our next trip, she goes into Expedia or Kayak or any other type of sites and looks for the cheapest flight to go to a destination. Then she goes to bookings or any other type of sites, and everything you actually do it without needing any help from anyone. The same goes, The same goes again if we go to tour guides. I remember we were in Portugal. Hey guys, those of you from Lisbon or Porto, we are actually there in the summer and we really liked it. We is my wife, my 3 kids, and myself. Wait a second. Thank you. And we didn't need a tour guide. We took Google Maps and everything was actually settled. So tour guides are also needed. And if you think about it that way also, we don't really need a social life because we have Facebook today. But to look at it in a more broader perspective, there are tons of occupations and careers that are disappearing over time and are disappearing very, very fast. For example, truck and taxi drivers. Guys, I don't know if you know that, but driverless cars and driverless driving, basically it's about making those people a commodity that won't be needed. Translators. With Google Translate, who needs translators anymore? We're using less and less translators all the time. Personal assistants or secretaries. It's so easy to make all of your arrangements with a calendar, and people do know how to type, and you have typing software that is better. Then again, this is a profession that it's going extinct. Recruiters, also we have tons of recruiting software that is helping us. Real estate agents have been replaced. Sorry, apparently I was muted for a second. So as I was saying, sorry for that, but it goes on and on. We have salespeople who are disappearing. We have tour guides who we don't need them anymore. The more interesting part is that, as people have been saying, even general practitioners, general doctors are not going to be needed anymore. And part of this is because of revolutions that we're having around big data and AI. What's the deal with big data and AI? Well, basically, they're helping people to advance in ways that, again, we hadn't thought about before. And if you look into the companies that are, again, providing the biggest advances in big data and AI, and talking about the really big ones that most of us use every day, and by AI, we don't really mean like the Terminator that is going to come and attack us, or the system that will take over computers and will send missiles all over again without looking into all the sci-fi flicks. We're basically talking about how big data and AI are reshaping the world where we live by looking to examples like how Google actually is helping us. And if you think about it, the simplest part of Google, even if you don't really know what you're looking for, using AI and using all the data that Google has, they're able to shift you and to show you the stuff that you think that you're looking for, maybe the stuff that they want you to see. But the same goes by Amazon. Once you start buying stuff, they look into your patterns and they help you to find more of the stuff that you're looking for. I know that, for example, lately, whenever I want to buy a book, I just go into Amazon and just look into the stuff that they're recommending me based on the book patterns that I buy on my Kindle app. And there are tons of additional applications like Waze. I'm not sure if you know about it, but I use it all the time. This is a very great way of navigating and getting traffic reports and understand exactly which is the best route to go from any place. And again, going back to tourism, I remember being in Portugal. I hadn't been there ever, and just opening Waze and driving there like as if I was a local, going through all the small alleys and stuff, only because we were able to do it using their big data and their AI in that. Uber, again, we were talking about driverless cars. Not sure how many of you know that, but Uber is investing heavily in driverless cars, and that is because they understood that they're not in the business of having drivers driving cars. They're in the business of driving people from place A into place B. And the best way to do that is basically by taking out the driver from the equation. And so they're investing quite a lot of money into that kind of research in order to make it better. And if you look at it, as I was reading a couple of papers about it, diagnostics in medicine are going to be done more and more based on big data. And one of the things that I'm not sure how many of you are aware of, using all sorts of AI algorithms. Whenever you fly on a plane, most of the time that the plane is flying, it's doing it by itself. Is the autopilot actually flying? So much so that basically planes today can land by themselves. And most of the time they can even lift off by themselves, but they still want to have the pilot so that, again, during those maybe more strategic parts of the flight itself, you will have a human in there, but apparently that won't be for long. Okay, so these are big revolutions that are reshaping the way that we work. Now, but how is this affecting the way that we're actually building software and testing it? This is what we're here to do. So obviously, R&D and IT are also changing. But before we talk about the way that we're changing now, I do believe that it's important to see this in the context of how it has been changing for the last, 20, maybe 30 years. And I do want to start about the evolution of development practices. And I want to take it, again, maybe it happened even before I was there, but I want to talk about my personal experience. And again, I started on the software testing industry around 1999, I think, 98 maybe. Actually 97 now that I think about it. And back then, I remember that people were talking about the waterfall model. And this was the only thing that, again, it was popular back then. But very early on, if you think about it, over the late 90s, stuff like that, we also started seeing quite a lot of the V model. That was basically an evolution of the waterfall model where we were actually thinking about testing in better ways. And then around, again, the 90s, it got started, but it got very popular around the 2000s. That's when we started talking about iterative development. And regardless if you're talking about Agile, Scrum, XP, anything like that, again, the same principles, high-level principles applied. And with the pass of time, then what started as being simple Agile maybe, then it turned into different types. And again, we started seeing other nuances like Kanban boards and stuff like that. And the latest nuance is actually the DevOps revolution, the DevOps way of working that we're seeing today. So we can see that development practices have been evolving and are evolving and will obviously continue to evolve because there's no reason to believe that it won't happen in the future. And just to understand, again, how evolution happens, let's take into account DevOps because I do believe that it's a very big force that we're seeing more and more and more today. And if you think about DevOps, it's actually pretty simple. Over on the 90s and more specifically on the 2000s, people started talking about iterative development, about Agile and working with small sprints and being able to release. And again, I remember working on projects where we used to release every 18 months. And then we cut that into 3 months. And now I work on a company that we basically have continuous delivery. So those cycles started to become very, very, very short. And as that happened, and in parallel and without any relation to that, we also started the internet revolution. So it was both the mix of working with small increments of software versus very large increments of or mega projects of 12 or 18 months together with the internet. And that's how we actually came to DevOps, because we're working on Agile, but we're also releasing on the internet environment. Now, just to take a look into DevOps, I guess that many of you are familiar with that, but I like this diagram because it's a very neat definition of how DevOps actually works. And again, you might be working in different types of DevOps, but this is a very neat schema that shows, again, most of how DevOps actually works today. So for those of you who are not aware of it, then DevOps basically means that you have a cycle where you plan the project that you're actually doing, you code it, you build it, and you test it. And this looks more or less like the Agile cycle. But immediately afterwards, you're going to be releasing it. You deploy it into the field. And again, you can deploy it massively. You can deploy it in a controlled deployment. You operate it You monitor what you have deployed, and you use that monitoring in order to continue planning, coding, building, and testing. And basically, if you think about it, DevOps came into play because people realized that we are releasing software faster into the field. And we need someone who will help us once it's done to release it, to operate it, and to tell us how it's working, and then to continue planning. So as the phases between development and operations became shorter and shorter, we just created a complete team that became, again, the DevOps team, where we included parts of people from both sides of the equation. Okay, so this is the big and short of DevOps, and I will talk a little bit about that later on. But again, when you talk about DevOps, basically, we're talking about that. But moving forwards with the chat, because again, this is a testing conference, obviously. So let's start talking a little bit about testing. And again, just as we talked about the evolution in development, I'd like to look into, again, those of you who maybe are older like I am, think about why did you test when you started. And as I mentioned before, I started working back in the 90s. And for those of you who are not around at that time, the biggest thing that happened to testers in the 90s was the Y2K bug. Again, people were extremely afraid that on December 31st, 1999, when the clock ticked 12 p.m., the world will basically fail. And we'll have Armageddon, and again, all the computers will go out and all the nuclear reactors will stop working. And again, people were really, really afraid. And what that made is that it required armadas and tons and armies of testers to just go out and test software. So if I try to think about it, I think that the biggest thing that advanced testing in the world might have been that, again, it was not a misconception. We found tons and tons of bugs, but most of them, the very, very vast majority, were actually solved and fixed. And so because of the frenzy of bug Y2K, then testing actually got into the mainstream, or testing became a lot more popular in most development firms. But what happens is that once we had tons of testers, and once we realized that it might not be very economic just to look for bugs, then we started looking into different ways of working. And so some of us started working more on business cases and on scripted flows. And some of us also started working more on exploratory testing and on context-driven schools. But basically, instead of just looking for bugs, we started working in more methodological and methodical approaches to testing. And as time actually evolved, we didn't stop there. But we saw that the value of testing was not only on, again, going over scenarios and going over the application, but also on making sure that as we needed to support more and more environments, as our applications needed to support, again, mobile devices and different, it started even by web browsers and operating systems, and then it switched over to mobile devices and stuff like that. So we also needed to provide that certification, not only certification, that validation, that the software that was written on platform A was working on platform B, C, and D. So if you look at it, the way that I like to see it is that what started as basically people being afraid and telling us, hey, go ahead and run everything in order to try to find bugs, and we're basically running around the software just looking for bugs, become a more methodological approach of, again, trying to cover the system. But then it became also part of the value that we started providing our stakeholders by validating that the software actually worked on multiple environments. With time, I believe that people in testing started saying, hey, we need to define what our value to the organization is. And that is where during the 2000s, at least I started seeing, I guess that most of us did, people started to define what we do in a different way. And this is my personal definition, and I've seen some of them that are similar, but I still want to share it with you. And I think that if I look at myself and I look at my teams and I look at the charter of my teams as testing teams, our objective was to provide visibility into the products and the projects that we're working so that the stakeholders of those projects could actually make their tactical and their strategic decisions. By the way, I think that for the vast majority of organizations, this is still a very valid charter. This is what we do. What we're here to do is basically, again, we have a very big product that we're working on, and we want to provide visibility into that product, into that project. And again, the difference between product and project is in product, we're looking into areas of the software and we're looking into bugs and stuff like that. We're looking to the project, we're looking to productivity. Like, okay, if we look into the future, how can we do this better? And we're doing this because we have stakeholders, we have customers that are looking for that service in order for them to make those strategic and tactical decisions. If I try to compare this definition from just finding the bugs, I think that we started basically like kids, and I myself was a kid in college, basically looking around, trying to grab those bugs that were in the system. And we modified our approach into something that actually is providing visibility. It's helping people to make decisions, okay? So whenever I talk to someone who's looking into testing or tries to define what tester does, and on that visibility definition, I try to say, hey, imagine that you're a doctor and you want to go into an operation, but you want to know how the patient looks on the inside. So you will go to an X-ray technician or to an ultrasound technician in order to get that visibility to understand how the patient looks on the inside before you actually start that operation. So that is what testing is doing. We're actually providing that X-ray vision into our system so that people can make the decisions on, hey, do we need to operate? Is there another way to do it? Where do we need to go into? How do we need to do it? And so this change is basically a change where at the beginning we're staging the process. I remember working in the 90s and asking my VP of R&Ds and stuff like that, hey, why do we test? And they said, well, they told me I needed to have testers, so go ahead and do your stuff, without really understanding what we were doing. And we're basically a stage, and it was even more problematic than that. We were the last stage on the process. And from looking at us as one stage on the process, we basically became a value-adding service to our organization that will help them not only as a step on the process, but as something that they could actually use throughout the whole process in order to generate, again, that value and that service that we're doing. And that is why I think that if we look into QA, if we look into testing, we should not look at it as an isolated process. We are not a process. There is no reason for testing as a standalone product per se. We are a service. Now, what is a service? A service is something that has customers. A service is something that you're doing because someone actually needs a specific value from you. And a service is very focused. And again, to go into that, the service that many of us are providing is the service of visibility, more specifically into the product and the project, so that our customers, our stakeholders, and these are the guys who we need to provide them the information, can make those decisions. So basically that means that if you do not know who those stakeholders are and what decisions they're going to be making, and you just go ahead and start testing, you might not be really doing the service that you need to provide them. So that is the first point that I want to drive here on this session, and that is that regardless if you're going to be looking into this definition or the definition that I'm going to be talking about in 2 or 3 slides, you need to look into what you're doing as a service and not as a product, okay? And when people ask you, what is your value? The value that I'm doing comes with the help that I'm providing my organization and not with the bugs that I'm finding, okay? I try to explain to people, if I was able to provide the same information by looking into a crystal ball without running a single test, manual or automatic, or doing anything else, I would still be doing my job. Okay, and that is the way that we need to look into testing. By the way, I see people who are asking questions already on the chat. I do recommend that you go ahead and use the Q&A that you have in there and pass those questions along, and I will be going over them towards the end. Now, as I said, this is the way that many of us might be working today, but this is not the way that the future is actually going to, okay? And I want to steal, and I do mean it, there are a number of very intelligent testers, I'm not a number of them, I'm not within them, that are talking lately about quote unquote modern testing, Might that be a new term? And I know that they are coining that, and I'm just still in it because I didn't have a better way of defining that. But it's basically a way of saying, hey, testing is also changing, and we need to look into how it's going to change. So Alan and Brent, you guys know, and again, this is your turn, but thanks for taking it. By the way, that's Alan Page and Brent Jensen, and I'm going to be talking about them in a couple of minutes. So let's talk a little bit about modern testing. Let's start from where we left on our DevOps team, and let's look into how testing actually fits into this. So obviously, testing fits into the testing phases that we see here. Testing needs to be done. And you can also say that it's trivial to say that testing also fits into the planning phases, okay? Because we're looking into the plan of what we need to do. We're planning the test cases. Maybe we're even, again, broadening our spectrum and providing feedback during that planning. And we're obviously testing here. But what you see is that when you have a team working, even agile, doesn't need to be DevOps. Obviously, DevOps more. Did you start seeing that there are other places where the testers, the quote-unquote testers on the team, can actually provide value? You start seeing that even without knowing code, and guys, I know how to code. I've been scripting for a large part of my professional life, but I would never define myself as a developer or a person who knows how to professionally code. But I do see it with a lot of our coders, a lot of our developers, and we do pair programming, and we go over what they're doing, and simply by sitting with them and asking the questions and understanding what they're doing, we're able to provide feedback. So we're also seeing that on DevOps team, where testers actually sit with their developers, their coders, in order to provide that feedback. We also see that on the release process, on the monitoring process, we're having a lot of feedback. Why the release? Because again, there's a release decision where they take what we're doing, they understand if what we've been doing is okay, and we actually take that in order to make those decisions. So that is also part of what we need to do. But it doesn't stop in there. When we talk about monitoring, again, we're releasing products into production. And the idea of monitoring is to understanding how people are using the software, to understanding if they're running into errors. Not only that, I remember, and again, talking about a lot of, I am fairly good listener of the AB podcast. And if you don't know what the AB podcast is a podcast by, again, Alan Page and Brent Johnson. Very recommended. And one of the things that I always like Brent saying is that quality can only be defined by your user. And when I look into that, I look into monitor, and that is something that we also do in our company. Whenever we release a new feature, we always look into the logs for that new feature. Why? Well, the trivial answer is to look for error messages. But not only for that, you want to look into usage. Why? Because there's a pattern. If you release a new feature and you actually make a lot of noise about it, then there will be that first wave when people actually log into that feature to look into it. But the question is whether after that first wave, people adopt that new feature and start working with it. If they work with it, if they're happy with it, then obviously you have a quality feature on the product. Obviously you have a quality product. If they don't, then also during that monitors, you will be able to understand what people are doing in there. Okay, so it's important for all of us to understand that part. So part of that monitoring is also part of the quality, and we have quite a lot to say on that. And the other parts where we have quite a lot to do and to provide is on the building and the deployment phases. And this is basically a technical reason for that if you think about it. Think about your automation, okay? If you have automation in your team, obviously whenever, if you have a CI process, CI is in continuous integration, then basically someone will push their code. You will build the code, you will deploy it into a testing environment, and you will run your automation. Regardless if you do it every build or you do it once a night, that needs to be automatically done. So you're basically creating an automatic system, a platform, scripts that will go ahead and will build that project and will deploy it into your testing environment. What usually happens is that someone, maybe you, maybe people from the operations team will use that stuff that you built in here and reuse it also in the deployment environment. So very quickly you start seeing testers being part of the deployment environment here. And again, I've seen it in a number of organizations where for some weird reason, the testers are also in charge of deploying to production. I see, again, testers with all these grants on Amazon AWS, and it looks a little bit scary at the beginning, but it makes quite a lot of sense once you realize that, hey, those guys have actually the biggest experience building the software because they need to test it. And in order to test it, they need to build it first. So what we're seeing, and again, we have quite a lot of people who will talk about it, and Jesper is also going to be talking about it a little bit later today, is that we are switching into other places. By the way, also, there's a great session by Danny tomorrow that he will also be talking about his experience, and they're very, very recommended. But we're seeing how those shifts are happening. So what that means is that the value that we're providing, if it used to be around testing, maybe around giving visibility on the coding, maybe on the planning, has shifted to other areas of the product. And this is where the concept of, again, modern testing and AASQ actually comes into place. And without further delay, what is AASQ? Going back to Brent Jensen on the A/B testing podcast, what Brent has been saying for a number of months, I think, right now, is that the charter of the modern tester has shifted from that person who used to provide visibility into the organization into a more general and maybe a broader charter, where our work here is basically to accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. How does that happen? Well, we saw it here. By participating in a lot of different aspects of what we're doing, by being more involved in the coding practices, by monitoring more. Brent talks quite a lot about all the data that we can get and becoming data scientists. Maybe that is because he has become a data scientist himself, but all the different value that we can do here. And I do believe that these guys are up to something. They also talk that if we look into modern testing or their definitions, it's an evolution from the agile tester definition that, again, we've seen all over. But basically what we're seeing is that service that we're providing as modern testers is also going to continue shifting. And so we need to prepare ourselves for that. Now, what does this mean? Basically, I believe that testing as we know it today, and if I try to look into the future, maybe 20, maybe 30 years from now, testing that we do today, where we go over the system manually or automatically, where our jobs is to go in, day out, and test the software in order to provide visibility, is going to end. And you can see, I'm not talking about this happening tomorrow, but I do believe that somewhere in the future, and I will explain a little bit about it, the charter of testing will actually fall on a number of people. And our jobs as testers will be a little bit different, or a lot different than what it is right now. Why? Because everyone in the organization is already testing, because we see that developers need to test themselves. They're not only on unit testing, they're also doing manual testing. And if you look into agile teams, where a tester cannot test everything, then he's getting help on that. We also see people who say, hey, we're testing less and less pre-production because we're testing more post-production. So the way that we're testing today, and again, there are certain caveats to that. There will be industries where you will still need that robust testing happening before. But as it has been happening today, the testers have basically the exclusivity in testing, then it will cease to exist. And I do believe that we are starting to see that. I also, by the way, people who do not agree on what I'm saying right now, really, really happy about it, because I do getting more information from that and talking about people who actually are writing on the chat. I would be more than happy to talk about that, but this is my personal belief. The way the testing is right now will change. And again, by sticking our heads on the sand won't really help. We need basically to understand where it's going and actually to be part of that. And let's talk about how can we prepare for the future so that we don't miss that train. That, again, it's a very important train, but that it's going to be there and it's going to be happening in the future. How can you prepare for the future? And the answer is not only automation, guys. The answer is actually broader than that. First thing that you need to do is basically to understand that there's changing happening, and to understand that that change needs to be driven, and not to be afraid to drive at least part of that change. If you see that your organization is switching gears, if you see that your organization is actually starting to work differently, look for the places where you can provide value on the quality perspective. Again, guys, you're not going to be becoming people who write algorithms overnight, but you will have places where you can actually provide from the quality perspective, from the customer perspective. Be that person who actively drives the change. Trying to ignore the change won't make it go away. Okay? So instead of getting those changes sent to us, become one of those guys who are actually driving the change within the organization. Another thing that is important is to become pie-shaped. And I love the definition of pie-shape. It used to be that we used to say, hey, you need to become T-shaped, meaning you need to have like a large generalist basis and then to be specifically good at something specifically here. So the idea right now is that it's not one single thing that you will become very, very good at, but that you will still have a broad basis on testing, on quality, on technical knowledge, and then create specialities where you can actually become, again, the expert on that. And for example, you can be still the expert on testing or the expert on load or the expert on one point or another and still be becoming what is called a generalizing specialist, meaning, yes, I have my specialties, but I also know how to do the general stuff as well. Okay, so all of that is actually part of the change that we need to do. Another thing that, again, I'm not saying that there won't be any testing, but I'm saying that we won't be in charge of running all the testers. So instead of being that guy who runs most of the testing and that is very, very good at finding the bugs and stuff like that, we need to become testing leaders. We need to become testing mentors. And Lalit, I think, is going to be talking a little bit about that on the next chat, how to teach everyone else to test as part of their job. So again, it's not a bad thing that developers are testing. We actually need to be more aggressive on that and actually showing them how to be better testers at that. Very important, focus on our infrastructures. And I don't only necessarily mean automation. Obviously, automation is important, but it's not the only thing. There's infrastructure for building, there's infrastructure for monitoring, there's infrastructure for reporting. A lot of the work that we can do is look further down the line. Usually developers don't look that further down the line. We do it as testers instinctively. So let's use that in order to build that infrastructure that will help us to achieve shippable quality before, okay? And this is what we actually need to be focusing on. Also expanding quality outside of testing. There's shift right, there's shift left, there's shift up, shift down. And I don't want to go too much into Jesper's talk. He will do it a little bit later on. But I do believe that it's not only about shifting right and left that people are always talking. I think that we can shift up by passing the quality chat to higher levels of our management, not being afraid of talking to our CEOs or VPs about quality and how our customers actually appreciate it, or going deeper into levels of coding and providing our feedback on the way that people are actually coding. So we can shift, we need to shift, we need to actually push that shift to move everywhere. And very important, not only because I love this picture, but we need to keep our eyes focused and adapting all the time. Again, we should not be looking at our feet, trying to understand how the path actually looks. We need to be looking at that path and see how it's shifting all the time. Keep our eyes on quality, keep our eyes on the way that we need to work, and always adapt. Those who will know how to adapt, those who know today how to adapt, those who know how to understand where the value resides, are those who are actually moving testing forwards. Now, where will testing be in the future? And again, I know that some people might not agree with me. I do believe, again, these are my personal guesses, but I do believe that we have a very big chance of making this happen. First of all, there will still be regular testers. There are organizations that will take them more time to make that shift. So for the next 10, 20 years, for those of us, for those of you who want to maintain the same type of work that you're doing on manual testing, automation testing, stuff like that, we will still have jobs like those. I do believe that slowly but surely, those jobs will go down and down, and it will be harder to find those jobs because very good people are going to be actually doing those jobs, and the rest of us will need to look for other types of jobs in the future of testing. I believe that testing will remain very strong on specialized areas, and if we're talking about pie shapes and general specialists, then load, for example, load testing, security testing, localization testing, all of those are areas that will stick around for longer times. I do believe that afterwards they will also disappear. I said it before, but I think that if we look into DevOps teams, and I try to think what's going to come after DevOps. I think that I have an idea, but I'm not certain enough in order to share it with people. But our jobs are shifting more into testing coaches, quality architects, people who are actually bringing that quality perspective from the customer into our teams and providing that perspective and that high level overview. This is more and more what we will be doing. And again, quality will expand, and I mentioned that before, into what I like to call production analytics, and I guess that other people are also calling it, basically numbers, stats, understanding what's happening in the business, maybe providing this information not only to our development, but also to the product teams, maybe to the marketing teams, maybe to the sales teams as well. We will continue expanding how quality is used and the quality services are used by more and more people in organizations. And I think that towards the end, we will see that quality will become a discipline, like maybe security is today, or maybe, again, other disciplines in organization, where we will have more architects, more coaches, because testing and quality will be something that everyone in the team will be required to do. So instead of being how it was in the 90s, the developers were basically prima donnas that didn't run a single test, and we needed to run all the tests for them. Right now, they will be running the bulk of the tests, and we will be doing more of the guiding principles and showing people how to work. And I do believe that that is quite a lot about the future of testing, how it will be coming here. If you will be taking only one thing from my presentation, and again, I stole it basically because I really, really, really like it from what Brent Jensen has been saying lately. The value of the testing services that we have been providing up to now are shifting. And instead of being more about finding bugs or providing visibility, are going to go into accelerating the achievement of shippable quality in order to make sure that we can ship faster, better products based on all the range of stuff that we can do, of work that we can do with the team, of visibility that we can do. Again, visibility is going to be still a part of that, but it's not going to be all of that. And understanding that this is done as a service. We need to understand the context where we're working. We need to understand that we're not isolated. We're basically working with other people in our teams, and we need to provide them that value. So if you're going to be taking anything from my session, is that we need to approach testing as a service, and we need to understand what is the type of service that people are looking actually to get from us. And we have about 6 more minutes, and I do want to know a little bit more about what you think about it, and I will go over questions that I see on the Q&A side on here. I see here a question, again, it goes back into the visibility. If I can explain a little bit more about the concept of testing as providing visibility into the product for stakeholders. And again, I want to do that because I do believe that most organizations out there still are working on this realm. So going back to that, I want to go here. Sorry for doing it this way, but it's easier. So I do believe that most organizations are still working in this phase of testing, where our work or the value that we can provide to our stakeholders runs around the visibility. We're not here in order to catch all the bugs. Obviously, they want to know if there are bugs on specific areas of the product. Where should we actually be finding them? But we're here mostly to answer a very important question. And that question is, are we going to be able to release the product on time? And if not, and usually the answer is not, where are the problematic areas so that we can actually go ahead and proactively work on them? So we need to focus our work as testers on this realm. If your organization is on this path, if this is where you are, this is where you're needed, then make sure to provide this service. And the service is not to just run all the test cases that you have on your test plan. is to understand where do you need visibility. For example, hey, we're releasing a new release right now, and obviously regression tests are important to make sure that we don't have any big problems on the product, but hey, we're putting a lot of efforts on this and this and this area. Are they going to be releasable by the time that we need to release it? So that is the type of visibility that we need to do. And again, think about the decisions that your stakeholders may need to make, whether, hey, we may need to delay the release, we may need to shift resources into specific areas where we have problems. That is the kind of thing that you need to do in there. And again, I have another presentation. The person who was asking that, I can provide you another presentation that I did in the past about this specific topic, and I will be happy to share it with you. I'm trying to go over the chat to a number of other questions that we're asking. Again, sorry for that, but I am moderating myself in this. If you have additional questions, go ahead and use the Q&A. There are people who are saying that they don't really agree with the idea that testing is actually dying. And I see quite a lot of questions and chats about that. And I want to explain that. I don't believe that we won't need testers anymore. I do believe that testers is something that we will need to continue having. But I do believe that as time actually evolves and we see more and more, obviously tests are being done automatically more and more. It's easier to automate more. There are quite a lot of, there's a chat, again, I do recommend by Danny Fogg tomorrow. He's going to be talking more about the whys of this from his personal experience, and I really like his presentation in there, as well as Jesper. You can see it later today. But I do believe that we are shifting the main value of testing from simply testing. We are, maybe in a sense, we are becoming more and more people who are working on quality assurance and not only testing anymore. And that is a big thing. That is actually something that maybe many of us dream about quite a lot of time, and it's finally becoming. So I do believe that is what is happening. So it's not that, hey, people won't need us anymore, but if you don't shift the way that you're working right now, it's going to be true, and people will really not need you that much. Okay, there's a question here. Are testers expected to learn all the DevOps tools? No, definitely not. I don't think, first of all, the number of quote-unquote DevOps tools are countless, okay? And all the time you're having more. I don't think that just in the same way that you do not need to know all the different testing tools out there, you need to know about them and you need to know a fair share of them. And even if you don't know every single tool for DevOps by heart, you do need to know all the processes of DevOps. And understand that there's going to be a deployment phase, and you need to understand what tools can help you to deploy better. And Jesper, I saw in his talk, this is talking a little bit about the different deployment, testing in production and deployment ways of people are actually working. And if you'll go later into that, that'll be great. Also, monitoring becomes something that we need to learn more. So I guess that if your organization is switching into DevOps, be more interested into what's happening there. It's very easy to just turn a blind eye and say, hey, I don't care about that because it's not in my realm of work. That would be the biggest mistake. You don't need to know all the tools in there, but you do need to be more interested in your, again, I'm not sure if you're working on Azure or AWS or any other hosted services. Learn more about that. Learn more about how to deploy stuff. It's going to be very useful for you in the future. Question here about QA as a service within the Agile process. I do see QA as a service in the Agile process, but I do think that as you will be shifting more into Agile, then that service is not only about running all the test cases, it's about making sure that all the test cases are being run. So that is going to be very, very useful. And again, recommend that you look into that. I think that we have time for one more question. And again, I will continue on the Slack channel a little bit later on, but there's a question here. You mentioned a lot about testers won't be doing. Can you talk a little bit more about what testers will be doing? And I do believe that, again, you can see it here. Testers, if up to now we were focusing only here, maybe also here, what we will be doing, we will be more involved into what's happening in operations. We'll be more involved into the data that we can get here, the processes that we can actually, from building into deployment that we can do here. how we make the good decision of what to release, how to release it. All of that will be part of the stuff that we will need to start doing. And that is only in the case that you're working DevOps. If you're going to be working Agile, then you're going to be more into coaching. You're going to be working more into how do we get the feedback loop close from what's happening outside into what's happening inside. It's different kind of monitoring, but it's the same objective that you're going to be having there. Okay, so I'm being told right now that I need to finish this chat. So a couple of things. First of all, thank you very much for sticking around. If you have more questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. I'm going to go to our Slack channel. But more importantly, this is my personal email address. If you have anything to say, if you agree with me, you don't agree with me, you want to cut my head off, send me all your comments to here. I won't be able to answer them, all of them quickly, but I will answer all of them. I promise that. And obviously on the Slack channels and everywhere else. So guys, thank you very much. This was only the first session. Remember, we have another session by Lalit Bamare in about 15 minutes on getting non-testers to test and how to help them help you. And afterwards, we have Jesper Ottosen, Kurish Macaulay, and James Bach still today. So thank you very much, and we'll be cutting into a break right now. Thanks.